In today's episode, we're going to be talking about building your authority as a writer, writing for big media sites, and ultimately book marketing secrets. My guest today is Kimanzi Constable, and he has an absolutely amazing story. He's a writer for the Huffington Post, entrepreneur, Mind Body Green, and he has his own set of books which he hustles on marketing. He's a great marketer. So first off, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Travis. It's kind of cool to do this after we met in person and shared a meal.
Absolutely. And you told me your story when we met, and I was really inspired by it. Can you tell the story again for the audience?
Yeah, definitely. So for 12 years, I was a bread delivery guy. I woke up every day at midnight and I delivered bread. And when I say that, I think even you had that first reaction. You were like, "What?" So people have that reaction. But I was the guy that you see on in the grocery store putting stuff up on the shelves. And I'd done that for 12 years. It was a franchise situation, so technically it was my business, but it wasn't in the fact that the main company told everybody what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And when you didn't comply, they had a team of lawyers that was very quick to get you on board. So it started out when I was 19 years old. It was fine. It was great. $60,000 a year. I was a business owner. Life was good. As the years went on, the company got bought out by another larger company, and this company was pretty ruthless. So they took a lot of things away that independent operators enjoyed, and their lawyers they got rid of a lot of people. It was a really rocky time. And so I knew there at the end, like around 2009, 2010, after about like 10 or 11 years doing this, that this was not going to be the future. These lawyers, all these conditions, it was not what I wanted to do, wanted to be a part of. And then in 2011, it was just kind of it was kind of the end of it, because after 12 years of mismanaging the business, I had got into business at 19. I didn't understand how to run a business, and after 12 years, I was $180,000 in debt. I was 170 pounds overweight from the bad habits that I picked up, eating fast food all the time and drinking Mountain Dew. And my marriage was falling apart because when you have stress with money, you normally have stress in a relationship. So in 2011, I remember just being there at a friend's house, thinking about everything that was going on and what was next. And I was just on his couch, just crying, like bawling my eyes out because I didn't know what to do or how I was going to overcome the situation. And as I was sitting there just thinking about what am I going to do, I randomly got a phone call from a friend of mine who I hadn't talked to since like high school. And he's like, for whatever reason, I just felt compelled to call you and see how you're doing.
Wow.
And I just kind of unloaded on him. I just like, I just got honest with him, and he talked me through some things and gave me some really good advice. And from there, I kind of picked my head up and I realized that if I was going to change, I was going to have to be the one to do something about it. That it wasn't just going to miraculously happen like you see in the movies, right? And so, one thing that I always loved to do was read books. So, I'd gone to half price books, just kind of browsing around. I wanted to get a new book. And a book jumped out at me, and it was called 48 Days to the Work You Love by a man named Dan Miller. And I thought, man, 48 days to a job I love, I definitely want that. And the book, of course, wasn't about leaving your job in 48 days. It was about that mindset of how do you get to the place of thinking about transitioning, of making big changes in your life. And I read that book in one sitting, and it was just an eye opener for me. And so from there, I knew I needed to vent about everything that I held up inside of me. And so I started just journaling everything that I've been thinking about the job, about the last 12 years. And that little journal ended up becoming my first book called Tales of the Everyday Working Man and Woman that I self-published in August 11th of 2011. And I put the book out there, and I think this is an experience most authors can relate to. The book didn't sell anything. I didn't have an audience. I didn't have I didn't know anything about marketing. I wasn't even on social media until the end of 2011. So, and authors, we work so hard just to create the book, and you put it out there and nobody buys it. So in 2012 is when I hunkered down and said, I want to discover how do you do all this stuff? How do you market? How do you sell books? How do you do all this stuff? And I spent a good 3 months just studying what worked, what didn't work. I tried to get past all the hype and all the BS, and I tried to get to what would actually work. And the bottom line that I found, Travis, and anybody listen to this, was if you want to sell books, if you want to spread a message, whatever, you have to have an audience. And if you don't have an audience, you have to get exposure where the audience is at, which led to my journey of strategy that we will talk about here today. But by the end of that year, I had self-published a second book, and both books had sold 45,000 copies. I had gotten some invitations to come speak when the books really started selling. I started getting exposure online. I got some chances to speak at conferences, which was kind of new for me. I got new coaching clients, and by the end of that year, we were able to use that money to pay down a good portion of our debt. My online business was consistently bringing in about $5,000 a month. And at that point, I felt comfortable in quitting the day job. So at the end of 2012, I quit that job that I hated. I like to tell you that I exited gracefully and was nice to everybody, but I was not. I told everybody exactly how I felt, and it felt good.
I
And
bet.
so from 2012 to 2015, it was just a matter of building upon the progress that I made. I did end up going on and lost 170 pounds in counting so far. We did pay off all the debt. We're completely debt free. My business now brought us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to where I live here, and I'm in Maui, Hawaii, where I live. And I get to write for some cool places now, like Travis mentioned, and I get to wake up every day and do what I love.
Let's talk about that process because going from delivering bread to where you are right now did not happen overnight. So there was obviously some steps, and let's talk about when you first realized you want to quit what you're doing. What did you do from there to be able to get to where you are now?
So I knew that I wanted to do something that gave me location independence, freedom. So I knew that was going to be some form of an online business. But from what I saw, I couldn't just have like one book or one product or whatever and expect to make a full-time income. It was just not realistic. So I saw you kind of had to be a jack of all trades.
Mm.
So I saw that coaching, consulting, speaking, books, information products, all of that had to have kind of been in the mix. And so the first thing that I did was, well, I wrote the book before I tried any of this stuff. But then I created like a couple little guides. I hustled up some speaking. But the thing that I did the most was I wrote. I wrote like crazy. So I wrote 80 articles that I sent off to be featured on other blogs. So guest posting. So I would write for another blog. They would give me 3 links back to my stuff, and it's exposure to an audience that had no clue who I was. So I sent off about 80 of these guest posts in the beginning part of 2012. 50 were accepted, 30 were rejected. And just through that, the guest posting that year, I was able to bring in 500,000 visitors to my website
Wow.
just through the guest posting. And when people came, some of them bought books, some of them bought coaching, some of them bought some of the other information products. But once I got that first initial, I remember the first time somebody hired me for $1,200, and I was like, "Is this real?" Like I couldn't believe it. Like somebody paid $1,200 for me, and then fear set in. I'm like, "Crap! Somebody paid $1,200. Like now I actually got to help this person and actually do what they hired me to do." So it was a process of getting that little bit of income from the different things that I was doing, and then figuring out how to scale that.
Let's talk about the guest posting really quick. And you said you sent out 60 different articles to people. How did you find different blogs that would fit with you, and how did you validate that they're not just some small little blog, or did you care at the time?
I didn't care. I
Okay.
sent them out to who would ever take them. Blogs that I read, blogs that I found. I would look at. There's a lot of, if you Google, you'll find like a lot of top 100 self-development blogs, top 100 health blogs. If you Google that, somebody has put a list together and they rank it according to Alexa or visitors or whatever. So it's easy to find one of those and just kind of poach off of that list.
And also, were all these articles, all 80 of them, separate individual articles, or did you have some overlap?
They were individual articles. They were original articles, but were there overlap in what I was talking about? Yeah, sure. There was some of the same topic, but just said in a different way.
Okay, that's good because I know there is a problem. People don't want the same article all over the internet kind of thing going on.
Yeah, no, they were especially blogs. Large publications they will allow reprints, but blogs like bloggers, individual bloggers, they're worried about Google and double penalties and all that good stuff.
So, other than obviously sending them the article, how did you manage to? Because I get people sending me articles all the time, like, hey, will you post this? And sometimes say yes, sometimes I say no. How did you get them to say yes?
I always started by kind of finessing the relationship. So the first thing I do is I would go read their blog, I would comment on their blog, and they would get to know who I was through commenting on the blog. So I wasn't completely unfamiliar. Then I would share their stuff, and I'd make sure I tag them in it so that they saw I was sharing their stuff. So kind of building a little bit of rapport, connection one on one.
That's great advice. And now let's transition a little bit into the bigger media because blogs, that's great. And a lot of people know how to do the guest blogging and stuff. But something that really impresses me that you've done is you've gotten on Huffington Post, Entrepreneur, like all these really cool big sites. How did you do that?
So when I first started going after these sites, I kind of used the process that I used with the blogs, and I just went for it. So I found an editor at the Huffington Post. I started commenting on the articles that she wrote on the Huffington Post. I started tweeting her stuff, kind of making that connection there. And then I remember one time she said something about in an article about it'd be great to have articles on this topic.
Mm.
And so I wrote something. I saw that. I wrote something. I emailed her. I said, hey, I'm a fan of yours. You've probably seen me in the comments. You've probably seen me on Twitter. I have something in regards to what you wrote in your post. And I emailed it to her, and she said, okay, work on this, this, and this, and we can run it. And that's what I did. I worked on this, this, and this, ran it, and got into the Huffington Post. And then from there, it was kind of like dominoes. So then I went to Entrepreneur and said, found an editor that I thought would be receptive, did the connection thing, wrote an article based off of what I read on Entrepreneur, which is important. And I also said, hey, I just got into the Huffington Post as well. And then from there, it kind of just went from site to site using that same process.
When you said she told you to work on this, this, and this, was that just there different sections in your article that needed rework, or what was it specifically?
Yeah, it was the way that the article flowed. I think a lot of times, and this is what I even find now as an editor at the Good Men Project myself, is we're long-winded.
Mm.
we want to say um, we want to say what we want to say, and it rambles. And what she said told me was an article should flow. It should always build. You should never repeat yourself. And what I was doing was I was saying the same thing just in a different way, which was pretty much repeating myself. And she said, you want to think shorter, not longer. Instead of 1,200 words, you want to think more like 800 words. So she said, shorter, make sure the article flowed, take out all the adverbs. So, like when I would say something like really adventurous, which is kind of redundant, or using reallys and usuallys and actuallys, she told me to take out all that redundancy. And then it helped the article just be on point.
Do you find different sites like Huffington Post, Entrepreneur, etc., have different writing styles that you need to cater to as a writer?
Definitely. I think that's one of the most important things. If you're going to go for one of these sites, you have to write for that site. It sounds easy, but it's not. At the Goodman Project, for example, I have people that will send me a lot of very general business articles.
Hmm.
Those, I have no problem running those if they're good, but they won't do well on the site because it's men. You have to write something about or for men. That's who the readership is. That's what the mission of the site is. Entrepreneur Magazine, the same thing. You can write a very general article, but you have to write it to entrepreneurs, for entrepreneurs. and in the way that entrepreneurs like to be talked to. And the way that you discover that is you have to read the site, you have to read the articles, you have to get a really good feel for the content. So if you're going to write an article for the Huffington Post, those are going to be like first person narratives, like you're telling your story. If you were to write for Entrepreneur, you wouldn't do that. They don't want that. They hate that. So over there, you're going to be kind of approaching it like a journalist, like this is what I've observed.
Another question for you: with when you emailed the lady from the Huffington Post, how did you find her email? Like, because you said that you built up this rapport ahead of time. If I were to want to repeat that with Huffington Post, Entrepreneur, or some other magazine, I don't think I'd want to submit it through the general submission process because they probably get a lot of submissions. So how do you find how to email somebody?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to submit it through the general submission process. I know one editor at the Huffington Post told me that they get like 30,000 submissions a day. So it's going to be kind of like picking a needle out of a haystack. But the cool thing about a lot of sites like Entrepreneur or Mind Body Green or any other large life hack or whatever, they list the editor's email right there on the site on their staff or their about page. Huffington Post does not, but with a little research, if you dug around and you looked at a few editors' names,
Hmm.
you would see editors that do list their email address. And you know, the Huffington Post uses like a first name dot last name at Huffington Post format. So if you dug around and put a few editors in the actual Huffington Post search and pulled up their articles, there's editors that list that email address.
So let's also talk about when you sent them the email, how do you make your email stand out? By this point, obviously, you have some rapport, so you're at an advantage, but do you still employ a good subject line? And if so, what do you put as your subject line?
Yeah, you do want to stand out that way. And the way that you do that is by researching the person.
Okay.
So researching what they write, if they got a blog, you want to do something that captivates their attention, not just here's my submission on love.
Hmm.
But if you can find out that they wrote an article about, like one editor wrote an article about the Huffington Post editor, the original one, she was writing an article about her divorce.
Okay.
And so when I sent my subject line, like, my wife and I were separated for the very same reason you got divorced. And it was something very specific. And then
Wow.
I started the pitch email. I said, hey, I really enjoyed this article because my wife and I went through the same thing.
Wow.
And I've been, just kind of establishing that rapport and showing her that I'd done my research and I knew what was going on. On our podcast, I call this the podcast called Starve the Doubts with Jared Easley. We interviewed Guy Kawasaki, and we said, Guy, if somebody wanted to connect with you, how would they connect with you? He's like, and I'm not telling your listeners slash viewers to do this, so don't do this. But he's like, I would just straight up lie. I would say, hey, Guy, I saw you speaking at FinCon or wherever. Because Guy said I would never know if you were there or not.
Hmm.
He's like, just straight up lie. But he's like, if I saw that, like, oh, you saw me speaking, he's like, I'm gonna reply to your email. So I'm not telling you to lie, but I am telling you to do your research. And if you can figure out like one thing about that person and put that, that's going to go a lot farther than the generic submissions.
You know, it's really interesting you say that because recently I've been having on people I met at Podcast Movement, including I'm going to have Pat Flynn on my show in about a month. And when I met him, he's like, "Oh, when you email me, just make sure you say we met at." This was actually originally at NMX. He's like, make sure you say we met at NMX. And I kind of thought, chances are he's not going to remember me. He's going to look at that email and be like, "Oh, I don't remember this person, but I probably met him. I probably believe this." So it's kind of interesting. I've never lied about it, but that's an interesting way to go about it for sure.
Yeah, Guy Kawasaki, he has some interesting things to say.
So let's talk about snowballing, because you said once you got on the Huffington Post, it just kind of snowballed from there. How did you help push that snowball so you get featured on all these other big publications?
Yeah, I came up with a list of like six that I wanted to target.
Okay.
So I had this list already, but having the Huffington Post as your first one that you got into kind of gives you that name recognition. What I want before we go on, what I want people to understand is even if you don't get into the Huffington Post first, even if you don't get into Entrepreneur first, it honestly does not matter. The thing that matters the most is the article that you send in. If that article is on brand for that publication, meaning it's written for that publication, that's going to speak volumes above any, like, a lot of, in the internet world, it's all about like relationships, who you are, what you've done, blah blah blah. In the writing world, large publications, news media, it's not. It's about the content, period. So if you are like, well, I didn't get into the Huffington Post first, that's fine. You'll be fine, as long as the article is good. But if you do get into a place like the Huffington Post, leverage that name to get into some other places. I've leveraged it not only to get into the other publications, like I targeted 6, I got into all 6. I got into Entrepreneur, and then Entrepreneur went into Mind Body Green. The Mind Body Green went to Addictive Success, and it went on from there. But not only get into other publications, other opportunities. So when I wanted to speak at this conference, there was a conference in Vegas that I wanted to speak at. It was June, so I spoke at the conference already. But when I wanted to get on the radar of the organizer, I wrote about conferences to attend in 2015, and his conference was number 1.
Mm.
And I linked to it. Then all of a sudden, he saw that, he emailed me. He's like, "Who are you?" And it started the conversation, and it ended up being the highest paid speaking event that I've ever done. So leveraging that for speaking. When you want to get business, like you want to get clients, every time I write an article on Entrepreneur, I always get at least one client. So it's not only leveraging it to get other publications, it's leveraging it to get other opportunities.
So let's talk about leveraging it to get other publications really quick, and then we'll talk about the other opportunities. But when you send an email, for your example, after you wrote for the Huffington Post, you send an email to Entrepreneur. How do you tell them that you wrote for Huffington Post without it coming off as cheesy? Like, how do you say, like, by the way, here are some of my credentials?
I don't think it comes off cheesy in writing,
Okay.
because I usually format the email where I'll say like something personal, something that shows them I did my research, and then I'll say, here are my writing samples, because editors don't want one hit wonders.
Mm-hmm.
They want to see that you're out there writing. So when I say writing samples, then it's Huffington Post, Mind Body Green, then you can just link to those, or mention those, and it won't sound like you're bragging.
And another question for you. So you talk about how you get new clients every time you do an article for Entrepreneur or something like that. Now, a lot of these sites, they don't let you have a link back to your website. Is that correct?
You do get links inside your bio.
Oh,
Not
just in the
only
bio. Okay.
not only do you get links, you get like there's like book widgets, there's like widgets for other things that you have going on. So it's like a Huffington Post. I had an article that it was called "The Day After My Wife and I Separated." It got shared 250,000 times in 6 different languages.
Wow.
And at the end of that is my 2 books. And so that week ended up being I sold 1,200 books in 1 week just
Wow.
from that one article. So you do get links. You can strategically link inside articles as long as it makes sense and it's not super spammy. So if you're talking about how you helped a client or how you helped someone with something specific, you can link to that thing as long as it makes sense in the context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just they don't want people to be overly self-promotional.
Yeah, because I have one writer who's a great writer, at the Goodman Project, but every time he sends an article, there's like literally 20 links. Like, I'm not even exaggerating, like
Wow.
20 links, and it's like, dude, that's too much. Come on.
Yeah. So once you've started writing all these articles, and actually within the process, you talk about building your list. How do you build an email list? Because it's one thing to have great articles on Entrepreneur, Huffington Post, etc., but that doesn't necessarily mean people want to give you their email.
No, and that's the thing where a lot of people get it wrong. A lot of people come into a large site, they'll get an opportunity like this, and they'll think they want to build a name for themselves, or they want to talk about, I don't know, Bernie Sanders or whatever. When the reality is a large site kind of works the same way as social media. It's a lead generator. You want to get people back to your website. So when you're in a large site, your goal is to write content that gets people to click. So, like, a lot of things that I see people do are they'll write articles like 3 lessons I learned about business from my dog, or 3 lessons my girlfriend taught me about business, whatever. Like, when I'm, as a reader, I see that, I'm like, I don't care about your dog. I don't care about your girlfriend. What's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of writing that kind of stuff, you write stuff like, I got an article coming out that's called on doing Monday called The Difficult Realities of Building an Online Business, where I talk about some of the struggles and how you can overcome those struggles. When somebody wants to know more, what are they going to do?
You can go to
They're
your
going to
website.
they're going to go to my website. They're going to see my free guides that I have there that tell them how to build an online business, and they're going to opt in. So the content that you're creating on a large site is really clickable content. And so that means some things that people hate. It means like listicles where you're listing out numbers. People hate those, but you know what? They work.
Mm-hmm.
They work. You can't deny the results. So it means that kind of stuff. It means sometimes you're writing clickbait headlines because people click on clickbait headlines.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to do that all the time. Sometimes you're going to get a little bit deeper. There's going to be a message you want to share. But 9 times out of 10, if this is your business and you're trying to build your business and your list, you have to focus on content that's going to get people that wants them to click back and get more.
Wow. So this has been a lot of information on guest blogging, different media sites. But one other thing I wanted to talk to you about was marketing your book. And the reason is, and you don't know this, but while I was at Podcast Movement, I actually ended up talking to the guy who's, I believe he's publishing your book. And we were just having a general conversation. I kind of asked him, how do you decide what books to publish, which ones not to? And he's like, look at Kimanzi. He's a guy that's going to hustle. He's going to get that book sold. He's going to do a great job selling it. And that really hit me hard. I'm like, wow, what are you doing? What are your secrets? And obviously part of it's building this list, but can you talk a little bit about hustling to sell a book?
Yes. So book marketing today it makes me sad sometimes because the thing that's passed around is like KDP free days
Mm-hmm.
and this kind of stuff. There's definite things that you can do to get a spike on your book. Like you can get your book on a book promotion list like a BookBub. BookBub, the biggest promotion list in the world. I've had my books on there and they've sold like 5,000 copies in 3 days. That's great. It's a nice spike, but it's not consistent. You can get your book on a book club. Like Pat Flynn featured my second book in his book club, and I sold like 2,000 books. That was great, but that's a spike. But consistently, day in and day out, the things that sells your books are the exposures that you get. So, like a podcast interview like this, guess what? A few of your audience members are going to buy my book.
Yeah.
Now, multiply this where I've done now over like probably 120 podcast interviews since 2012. So that's a few podcast interviews, and a few people from those interviews have bought my book. Guest posting, when you're doing a guest post, people click back, they buy your book. Writing for the large sites, we've already established. I think that's the best way to sell your book because you have those widgets there. When people like the article, it's one click, they're on Amazon, they're buying your book. I think it's social media. Using social media, Facebook, Twitter, yeah, I don't know. Instagram is kind of where I'm seeing is a really good place to sell books. I sell probably 300 books a month on Instagram. I have a coaching client who does way better than me. He's got a thing called Alpha Home Flipping. He's a real estate guy. He's selling like 600 to 800 books a month through Instagram. So there's a little bit to do with social media. Speaking, going out there and speaking. When you go at a speaking event and you ask them, even if you don't ask them for a table, after you get done with your event, you're like, hey, if you have questions, meet me in the back. You got a couple of copies of your book, you're going to sell some books. If you have a table, like Travis saw, we had a table at Podcast Movement. We were the only authors there, and it's Jared's conference, so whatever. But we ended up selling 190 of our new book, and I sold 100 of my book. So it's if you speak somewhere, it's a great opportunity to sell books, and you can even for your speaking fee, you can even ask conferences to buy a certain number of copies of your book to get you out there. And then there's things you can do, like some things that I've done. I've gone to companies and corporations, like especially when I lived in Milwaukee, and I've just gone in there and cold approach, like, hey, this is my book. This is who I am. I think this would be great for your employees. And I was able to get like buys of like 500 or 1,000 books. So straight up hustle, straight up trying to get those bulk sales.
That was so many bullet points. That's the kind of stuff I love because there was no fluff involved in anything you just said. So thank you very much for that.
Good. No fluff.
Let's talk. The last question. I kind of want to wrap things up here, but the last question I always ask my guests is, what general advice do you have for people in their 20s? What do you wish you would have known earlier on? And you can take that however you want.
I wish There's a lot of things I wish, but I think I wish I would have had, as cheesy as it sounds, I wish I would have had a mentor, like somebody that I could learn from, somebody that I could, even if I had to like work to get his advice, like pay for it or work for him or intern or whatever. I wish I would have found that person that was ahead of me that I could learn from. Because if I did, I wouldn't have been $180,000 in debt. If I had somebody that sat me down and said, hey, this is what you need to do for taxes, this is how you need to structure your payments, and blah, 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 I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. So it's not always easy because people are busy, and especially if like you're in the online space, there's a whole lot of fronting and a whole lot of filters and a whole lot of internet famous people. But if you can find that person, that group, that maybe mastermind that could show you, help you, I think that goes a long way. And I wouldn't have said that when I was younger, but I see it so much now. If I had a mentor, it would have made all the difference.
That's some great advice. Where can people find out more about you?
You can head to kimanziconstable.com. That's KIMANZICONSTABLE. Or you could Google Kimanzi Constable, and there's not that many of us. Or you could go to livingorexistingbook.com, and that'll redirect you to the site.
And I'll put all the links in the show notes. Kimanzi, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter. And I release a new video every Monday. And by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.